Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on the latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is John Bird, EVP here at InfoTools, guest hosting from the beautiful Bay Area. Today, I'm joined by another Bay Area resident, Professor Stephen Kraus of the University of San Francisco. Steve is an expert in marketing and consumer insights. He is the author of 3 books and many articles and has delivered what I think was a great TEDx talk. Particular areas of expertise include digital media, market research, social trends, affluent consumers, and generational marketing. He has led 3 major syndicated research studies, and his insights are widely cited in the media, and definitely somebody I look up to. So it's going to be a fun discussion. And Steve, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks, John. Great to be here.
So, as I mentioned, I did watch your TEDx video, and it was kind of a time capsule because I initially thought it was you must have just done this like a couple weeks ago, and then I started to realize it was done back in 2017. It's just interesting how things just kind of stay the same. I mean, the names of the people have changed a little bit, maybe to protect the guilty, but it was definitely fun to see. So, as you know, part of our discussion is we start off with something significant. So, I'd love to know what significant thing you would like to talk to us about today.
Well, I think the thing that I would like the folks in the market research profession to know is that there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration between folks in industry, whether on the supplier or the client side, to collaborate with folks in higher education. And as we talk today, we'll talk about some examples of that and some benefits of that, for both our corporate partners and our students. Yeah, as folks in the market research industry are thinking about just new projects. They need more folks to work on things. They're looking for new ideas. They're looking for fresh thought leadership. Like I said, there are a lot of opportunities to collaborate with folks in higher
Yeah.
education.
Yeah, I think Priscilla has a book on collaborations and new competition, I believe is the name of her book. I'm sorry,
Mm.
Priscilla, if I got that wrong, but it's so true. You can't, I mean, so often you see yourself as a competitor to somebody else, but the reality is everybody has their own expertise and you really just need to rely on folks.
Yeah.
Um, Overall, I mean, your career is fascinating, from leading major research studies like the Ipsos Affluent Survey, which is fascinating in itself, but also working with digital insights startups. Can you share a little bit about your journey and how that shaped the approach you've taken to consumer insights and just in general innovation?
Yeah, I have a long kind of unconventional path through the world of market research, and it really started. I was an undergraduate at the University of Florida studying psychology. It's interesting to me because I wanted to study the big questions of what does everything mean and what's the purpose of life, but it also seemed very practical in some way that I hadn't yet identified. And at the time, really, I just assumed I would have an academic career because that was all I knew. My father was an English professor. My mom taught first grade. My sister was a
Hmm.
sociologist. I used to joke that I was 16 before I realized most people had to work in the summer. Um, so I went from undergraduate to graduate school. I got my PhD in social psychology from Harvard. I actually, after graduation, went back to University of Florida and taught for a couple of years there. Taught research methods and statistics and that kind of thing. Um, and then, the job market wasn't great in the early '90s, especially on the academic side of things. So I started exploring jobs at some market research firms. I had no idea what market research was, but I sent off 3 applications and I got 2 offers for interviews within a couple of weeks. And I'm like, wow, I like this market research thing, whatever it is. Uh,
So when you
so
got
so
to the
that
fork in the
started.
road, you took it. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad I took it. So that kind of started my 30-year odyssey through the world of market research. I started off doing custom research, working for some supplier companies, doing customer satisfaction, market segmentation, conjoint analysis, all that kind of stuff. And then I sort of found where I think I was more interested to go, where I was just better placed, given my interest was in the syndicated world of research. So I worked for a number of years for Yankelovich, the Yankelovich
Yeah.
monitor, which is the Kantar monitor, but one of the pioneering longitudinal studies in consumer attitudes, values, lifestyles, generational dynamics, all that kind of stuff. After that, I went to, like I said, Ipsos and ran the Ipsos Affluent Survey, which was, it's kind of the Yankelovich monitor for rich people, and did that for 7 years and really enjoyed it and had a good time and wrote a couple books on affluent and wealthy people and did a TED talk on income concentration and how it shaped all kinds of markets, not just luxury markets. And then from there, I wanted to really explore the world of digital data collection. So I worked for a couple of startups that collected clickstream data and kind of doing thought leadership, public facing white papers, webinars, getting their name out there based on insights I would develop from the data.
Right.
And then January of 2020, the startup I was working for went from killing it to killed in the course of 1 week. That's a subject of a different podcast. And and so that was January 2020, and then the pandemic came right on the heels of it. And so I was looking for new opportunities, and I had some colleagues at University of San Francisco, and they said, "Hey, why don't you come give a guest lecture?" I'm like, "Okay." And I did that, and they said, "Hey, why don't you teach a course as an adjunct?" I'm like, "Okay." And they're like, "Hey, why don't you come on as a full-time professor?" I'm like, "Okay." And so with that level of foresight and planning, I ended up as a full-time faculty member at University of San Francisco and having a ball. I love it.
So I was going to ask you if it was a Rex Tillerson moment that stepped you down and to down into academia, but I guess that's not the case. So
Uh,
you'll have to watch the TEDx to understand that reference. But
I don't think I come even close to Rex Tillerson's salary either before or after his big jump in pay.
gosh, most market researchers are making 20, $30 million a year. But I'm just
There
kidding.
you go.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, obviously you have a ton of industry experience. I'd love to know what you see as the biggest challenges and I guess opportunities in the current market research landscape.
Yeah, well, a couple of challenges. One is no big surprise, is just survey quality.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about that. It's a big issue. I just had a colleague come in and give a guest presentation to my students. And this was a colleague who had done a LinkedIn post on which she was wearing the a T-shirt that said "F Survey Fraud." Um, so I kind of knew her perspective, but I kind of know the challenges of survey quality in the quantitative world. She was really a qualitative researcher with a lot of perspectives on how there's a lot of fraud and just poor quality in the qualitative recruiting world as well.
Yeah.
Um, so I know there are a lot of companies working on this. There are a lot of webinars on this, conference presentations. I'm not sure anybody's quite nailed it yet. You know,
Yeah.
the most recent batch of studies that I ran with students, we worked with kind of a well-known panel provider with a good name, a good reputation for quality, and it's one that oh, we do these 47 things to check respondents before they ever hit your survey, and we did all that, and yet we still had people taking our 15-minute survey in 2 minutes. So there's still work to be done.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like every time you figure out one hack, another one comes up and it's
Yeah.
incredible.
I'm reminded of the quote of Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, who said, "Chaos isn't a pit, chaos is a ladder." And so, with all that chaos, there's still a lot of opportunity. There's big opportunity for delivering quality, reliable sample at reasonable prices.
Mhm.
But I don't think anybody's quite nailed it yet.
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. So you're teaching at USF I'm going to see if I can get through this. The Master of Science in Marketing Intelligence program. That's a mouthful. So what truly inspired you to transition back into academia and, I guess the bigger question is what really excites you about educating the next wave of market researchers, since you said why you're here, but I would love to know what really excites you about educating that next generation.
Yeah, I love teaching. So I teach a few undergraduate classes, some marketing principles, introductory to marketing kind of classes. But most of what I do is I teach in our MSMI program, Master of Science in Marketing
Mm.
Intelligence.
Yep.
So this is a 1 year program focused on market intelligence, market research. So you can kind of think of an MBA as a 2 year program, but it's pretty broad and general. And you learn about marketing, but you also learn about finance and accounting and all these kinds of other things. So we have a 1 year program, and we have an MBA program too, of course, but we have a 1 year program that's just focused on market intelligence. Um, We've introduced it 5 years ago. It's really growing well. We've beaten our enrollment targets every year. We get great students. We get a lot of international students from all over the world who want to come to experience San Francisco and get this degree. And it's just exciting because we can really change the trajectory of people's lives. So if we think about like an international student maybe coming from India or China, and they've already got some work experience, but I think an American employer would look at their resume and say, I don't know about that work experience because I don't
Yeah.
know the company they were working for. I don't know, should I discount that experience? But if those kinds of students can come here and get a good advanced degree that's STEM and data oriented from a good university, and they get placed into a good job. We've placed students at Amazon and Apple and Gap and all kinds of great names. I mean, that changes the career trajectory of that person. It really changes that person's family life, generationally. They're now living here in the Bay Area with one of these, high income knowledge worker jobs, whereas they started out coming from, a different country with, like I said, a lot of people would question their resume. So it's exciting to be able to, like I said, change the trajectory of people's lives like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, I mean, so kind of a little bit of understanding about the program. So
Mhm.
it's it's a lot of hands-on, or is it like are they working on projects with specific clients, or is it more traditional classroom settings?
Yeah, it's a little of both. It's a 1 year program, and when they start out, it's a little bit heavier on the coursework. So I teach
Right.
qualitative research methods. I also teach a class I call Foundations of Marketing Intelligence, which includes a lot of secondary research. And actually, just as a quick footnote, I love doing secondary research here because through our library system, we have access to tens of thousands of dollars of paid subscriptions to every kind of service you can think of,
Yeah.
from the super duper platinum level of Statista to all kinds of databases of industry analyst reports. So we have great resources to do secondary research really well. So the students take an entire course in that. They get trained in survey research, research methods, statistics, digital analytics. And then as we get to the end of that 1 year program, they go into our what we call our practicum program. And so that's when students in our program, we usually have about 30 or 40 students all together. I put them in teams of 5 or 6, and then I go out and I find corporate partners who have real research problems to tackle, and then I pair them up. So we just
Great.
ask those companies to write a 1 or 2 page problem statement or an RFP type document, and then the students have the opportunity to do the whole process. We're going to start with secondary research and then do some qualitative and then do some quantitative, and they get to deliver all that to clients. Sometimes for their final presentation, they can go, we go on site to the clients, and the whole company's invited, the CEO's
Mhm.
there. So we try to get them into as much hands-on, experiential, tackling real projects work as we can.
Wow, that's incredible. So I'm just out of curiosity, what are the demographics of people taking these courses? Are they like transitioning from a different job, or are they young and out of college and trying to figure out next
Yeah,
steps?
they're. I think the typical student in the program is probably 28 or 30. They usually have, on average, I think probably 2 or 3 years of work experience. MBA students are usually more like 10 or 15 or 20 years of work experience. Ours are a little bit more early in their career trajectory.
That's interesting. It's fascinating. It's funny how most people don't understand our industry is a gross overstatement, but I feel like once if you're curious and if your mind is very curious, it's an industry that you will love because it's all about kind of going into your point, going to the library and look at different data sources and coming back with different ideas for a solution.
That's
It's
one of the
very
things I tell my students, really right at the start, when we're talking about what is market intelligence, what kind of people do well in this field, and that's the number one word I arrive on is curiosity.
yeah,
And it's I mean, it's just fascinating. It's all about, human behavior and what makes people tick. And, if you're not intellectually curious and kind of jazzed up about the things that we're learning about and why do people do
yeah,
what they do and how can we shape what they do? And is that ethical or not? Like those are just
that's
really interesting issues. And if students aren't jazzed up by it, we know that they don't quite have the curiosity that might take.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I spent my start of my career at Frito-Lay and Pepsi, and I still go into the grocery store and spend an obscene amount of time in the beverage and snack aisle, just kind of looking at what's going on. It's
Hmm.
I've always been so curious about the evolution of snacks.
Yeah,
So
actually, that's one thing that I have my students do is we do in my qualitative research class, we have them do shop-alongs. So they kind of pair up with other students and like friends or roommates, and then they kind of do an in-store ethnography and ask them a few questions. And they're going to tackle a particular category, like toothpaste. All right, you're going to observe your friend as they go shop toothpaste. Shoot a TikTok style video and ask them a couple questions. How are they making decisions? Are they thinking about brands? And so we try to do that, like a good ethnography in the actual context of the store. And we also do a lot of training on, how do you ask good questions,
mm,
which is useful in that context, but also we train them, how to do focus groups and things like that. So it's yeah, it's very intellectually interesting stuff.
no, it's fascinating. So you're really giving them that, like all the tools and the ability to identify when do I use each different tool. So obviously a shop along is very different than doing a standard quant, but being able to
Yep.
identify when to apply which one. So
Yep, exactly. And we have a whole class on survey design, and they learn Qualtrics, and they get to work with real data sets and a variety of real projects. So yeah, they learn the whole gamut because that's I think the distinctions between qual and quant are maybe less relevant. There's so much gray area now.
yeah,
Or I was doing a lecture yesterday on neuroscience, and it's like, is this qual or quant? Well, yeah, I don't know.
sort
Um,
of
and
qualitative. Yeah, whatever a good word is to combine the two.
yeah, I think there's just such an eclectic approach now. For any given research project, we're probably going to do qual and quant, but the qual doesn't have to be old school focus groups. It could be ethnographies or a bulletin board kind of thing. I think there's um, just so much more mixed method
Yeah,
research.
exactly. And so
That
much qual can be scaled to almost be quantitative. I'm sort of going to ask a leading AI question, but I'm sure it had to come up somewhere along the line. But so what do you see as the emerging trends that you feel are going to have the biggest impact on the future of these folks that are taking your classes?
Yeah, well, definitely AI. And my approach to AI with them is that for many of their projects, they can use all the AI they want. And I'm like, great, it's a good tool. And we're a 1 year graduate business program. In 1 year, they're going to get out, and their boss is going to be expecting them to use AI. So we focus on how they can use AI well for the most part.
Right.
Um, there are some things where I don't allow AI. So I'm big on reading books. I think people should read books, especially in graduate school, and not just textbooks, because most textbooks are awful, but there are a whole lot of books about interviewing, about research, about consumer dynamics that are interesting and thoughtful. So I do assign real books, and then when I give them a test on the books, what I do is I give them let's say 3 essay questions about the main points of the book. And I tell them in advance these are going to be the 3 questions. And then there's one day where they have to come in, and it's an old fashioned in-person exam with their handwriting and paper, and no phones, no computers. Um, and on the one hand, I don't want to battle AI if I can't win. And there's so many scenarios where students are going to use it to do this. Like I can't really detect that. And um, so I've got a few narrow circumstances where I say they can't use AI at all because I want them to be able to read interesting books and get the idea and be able to kind of spit back. These are the important ideas. Here are some examples of how you could use it, that kind of thing. But generally, I tell them use all the AI you can. And we have a lot of international students, and writing and speaking in English, they have different ranges of their skill in that. So I'm like, use AI to come up with the first draft of your essay, or after you've come up with the first draft of their essay, see if AI can help you punch up those points where maybe you weren't sure like what the English terminology was or something like that. Um, and we have students do qualitative research that they record and have AI transcripts and kind of the I think AI is great at taking the first pass at qualitative data, and identifying what kind of themes are in all of those open-ended responses we got, that kind of thing.
No,
Um,
absolutely. But there's
so
still a need
yeah,
for the human. At Ipsos they talk about the human plus AI or HI plus AI, which I think is very true, right? I mean, who knows what's going to happen in 10 years, but
yeah,
right now there's definitely a balance of, and it's really just another tool in your toolkit. And
yeah. The other thing that I'm really curious to see how it evolves is the notion of synthetic respondents.
mm,
Um, the world of data collection and procuring sample is so different from when you and I started out. I remember doing telephone surveys, and we did, phone surveys for some things. We'd call them on the phone and said, we're going to send you something. We're going to send you, like, 10 pockets so you can sort the conjoint cards into those. And I remember when, the first online panels came out, and I was one of those people saying, that's not representative. That's never going to work.
well, it wasn't
Uh,
back then, but yeah,
well, it's
right.
it's not really either now, is the thing. We
That's
kind
right.
of are trying to kid ourselves that it sort of is, but that's a different story. But I think in the whole panel world, that's another thing that's happening, is there's a race to zero. Can somebody figure out a way to just not pay respondents at all? And so if we just have AI respondents and they just answer surveys for us all day, I don't know what the quality is going to be, but somebody's going to come up
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah, that keeps learning on it. Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. And I think the one thing that we somewhat forget, and some people disagree with me, um, but I mean, if you think about weighting, and we've been weighting data forever, and that's basically creating
Yeah.
respondents or projections. It's creating synthetic respondents.
And if we're
I
that
think,
good at understanding consumer behavior and predicting it and understand how attitudes shape behavior, we should be able to do a decent job of modeling how a population of people would react to something, especially
yeah,
if, we can feed in all of the other, market research studies we have. How many, you think of a place like P&G, how many research studies do they have sitting around that they can, or I'm sure probably already have, like, feed into some large language model. So that would probably be incredibly well positioned to answer the questions about how people would likely respond to a certain product or service.
yeah. It's hard. I mean, as you know, I've been around for a while, and I was joking with my daughter. She was doing ad testing, and I'm thinking like, she takes an A and a B ad, puts it on foam core, and then stands in front of people and says, "Which one do you like?" And she's like, "No, you test it based on the one that sells the most products." I mean, it's like in real time, right? I mean, which is common now, but back then
Yeah.
it was like revolutionary. I can see, us going into more space like that where we can really get a solid read on products that are going to work based on the fact that we printed 100 of them on a 3D printer and got them out there immediately and got immediate feedback.
Yeah. That's another thing our students take a course in, is experimental design, because that
Yeah.
is used all the time in that kind of world.
Yeah, I'm really excited about. I mean, you brought up multiple sources of data, but I mean, we're playing with, the fact that nobody is really just looking at one data set and coming up with findings. They're kind of looking at a brand tracker, or, consumer confidence coming from a third party, customer satisfaction data, and getting a broader perspective on what's going on. So it's, if your customer is telling you they don't like you, but your brand is dropping in, favorability, you can, tie the two together. And that's a simple example, but I think it's really interesting how much AI can give you, and the power to analyze that type of data very, very quickly. So
Mhm.
for me, it's exciting. I think some people they're paranoid, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in the long run.
Just
So
because you're paranoid doesn't mean people aren't out to get you.
yeah, yeah, that's true. I always feel like someone's out to get me. So, and I like to fail fast forward. So I'm kind of the guy that will try new things. And if it doesn't work, then yeah, just get up, dust myself off, and kind of keep moving. So,
Yeah.
but I'm interested to know more about your generational marketing and what you think market researchers need to focus on to engage with Gen Z and kind of the younger audiences. If you have any examples or how you're teaching your younger audiences it.
Yeah, I do. I do usually have some classes of undergraduate students, and actually, it gives me an interesting perspective for collecting data, because I'm always doing surveys and polls with the students and things like that.
Mm.
So I I have several classes of graduate students who are pretty much all millennials, and several classes of undergraduates who are pretty much all Gen Zs. But there are plenty of other differences between them, between just the generations. I mean, they're at different points in their lives, and they've come from different places, and so it's not the cleanest, most pure analysis. Um, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about Gen Z and how it can relate to them more. So the most recent data I collected was I asked both millennials and Gen Zs, what are your top three favorite brands? And so Apple comes up number one for both of them. Nike is in common for both of them. Um, but there were two things the millennials mentioned that the Gen Zs didn't mention, and one was Google, which I think is interesting. And so it's not that Gen Zs don't use Google, of course they do, but so much of their search activity now happens on TikTok or on
Yeah,
Reddit that it is kind of a very different digital environment they're working with. And the other brand that was on the millennial list but not on the Gen Z list was Disney. And so I asked them about that, and the millennials were into Disney, but a lot of times it was the animated films, or they were the Disney adults. They want to go to the theme park as adults, and the Gen Zs were like, Disney, that's just the place that ruined Marvel and Star Wars with a bunch of
interesting.
uninspired money grabbing sequels. Um, some of the Gen Zs also said, "Oh, it's too woke." There was a little bit of pushback on that, that notion that Disney is woke. Um, but anyway, I started to see kind of, what are the brand differences between the two? Because I always haven't been able to tell the difference between Gen Zs and so I also, do data on, well, what are their favorite music groups or brands or favorite TV shows or TV shows was interesting. Millennials very much went for kind of prestige TV. It was like, Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones and Succession and things like that. And the Gen Zs were much more lighthearted, guilty pleasure, Modern Family, The Office, even Grey's Anatomy showed up on the Gen Z list.
That's
Um, so
definitely
this is all, yeah, it's
definitely
it,
lays out challenges for the Disneys and the Googles of the world to, as they kind of become, I mean, they're basically becoming less relevant. But,
yep, yep. I think as every new generation comes along, there's a generation of older brands that say, I just don't get the young people. I just what are they doing? We gotta hire, cool hunters and things like that to understand them.
yes.
So when I think about, how do I speak to Gen Z and connect with them? That's the first thing is kind of talk about things that are interesting and relevant to them and collect data with them that's relevant to their own lives. And so we talk about brands and music and sneakers and Trader Joe's versus Whole Foods, or we do a whole thing on positioning statements. And so I collect some data from them about the University of San Francisco and like where else did they apply and how do they view the strengths and weaknesses of those other schools. And so then when we put together a positioning statement, we're doing it with real data about the university that they understand and can relate to. So that's the first thing I do when I'm trying to connect with Gen Z is just that relevance angle. And I've actually thought about this a lot because I'm writing a textbook about consumer behavior and market research, and I kind of joke that I'm glad that I got around to writing a textbook in these last few years while textbooks are still barely relevant. Um, but I don't want it to be a huge 500-page monstrosity that is boring. And if you look at a textbook today, it's just long paragraphs of unbroken text, and it's just not engaging. And there's a focus on, oh, we're gonna list every single study that might possibly be relevant to this topic.
Irrelevant. Yeah.
So instead of 500 pages, I'm doing 200 pages. I'm just trying to do the stuff that's interesting and relevant and the stuff that you might actually remember a few years afterwards. And I'm going for kind of an infographic-y kind of look to the book, like not quite a graphic novel, but maybe close to a graphic novel, because I think that's just how people consume information. They're much more likely to skim and look at the charts and look at the graphs and just have a different perspective. And of course, they're short video, so I'm putting together some short video. I'm getting my TikTok account up and running.
I was gonna say it
Uh,
sounds like a role for TikTok there.
yeah, yeah. And some of the other things I do, although I hate the word gamification. Uh, Students love games, especially when we get those competitive juices flowing. So I do a thing with students every week I call marketing intelligence in the news. And so I take, the marketing intelligence headlines of the week and I put it into a quiz format. And then we use a software program where I'm quizzing them in class in real time. And they can see who's in the lead after every question. And at the end, there's a gold medal winner and a bronze medal winner and a silver medal winner. And
Definitely keep paying attention. That's
yeah,
great.
and it's super fun. It's super engaging. It engages that sense of competitiveness and um, so yeah. So I don't really like the word gamification, but
Yeah, if it
wow,
worked.
it works. And the other thing that I do that is kind of gamified, that's getting to be a big deal now in marketing education, is using marketing simulations.
Hmm.
So there are a bunch of simulations that we use in class where put students in teams of 3 or 4, and then okay, we're going to use the simulation. So each team is a company. We're doing one right now for the bicycle industry. So each team is a bicycle company, and they got to decide, okay, what kind of bikes are we going to specialize in? Who's our target market? Where are we going to open stores? How are we going to allocate money to this or that? And they make a whole bunch of decisions, and that's the end of a round or a turn. And they come in the next day and they see the results that, oh, team one's in third place with X% market share. And so they have to be thinking about their market share, their financial performance. There are a lot of simulations that are really realistic and a lot of fun, and also give students some exposure to kind of that just more
Reality.
of yeah, that reality and that client side experience. I've always been a supplier side guy, so I just know the researchy parts of it. I don't really know how clients put together advertising campaigns or any number of other things that really happen on the client side. So this kind of simulation, puts them more in a CMO kind of role rather than a market researcher kind of role. And I think we all enjoy that.
No, it's funny. I remember doing that in college. We did one for like investing in the stock market, and which was one class, and the other one was same type of scenario you're talking about, where you can decide, do I put all my money into advertising or do I put my money into product
Yeah,
quality or a mix thereof? But you definitely felt that you had limited resources, and I remember back then feeling like, gosh, I don't have enough money to do what I want to do, which is reality, right?
yeah,
As running a business, we're forced on a pretty daily basis to decide where we're going to allocate our resources. So I feel like we could talk for hours, but I do have one bonus question.
agreed.
One I want
Please.
to ask all the time, and a lot of people are looking for work. I'm just kind of curious. I have my perspective, but what your thoughts are on the future of jobs in the market research space.
Well, the job market is a little tough at this moment, especially out here in the Bay Area. Google and Meta, I think, let go a ton of really talented people, and that's kind of creating a glut in the marketplace that kind of trickles down to a lot of positions, not just software engineers. But so I think it's a little tough right now, but I do definitely see signs that it's picking up. In our program, we're really proud. We had coming into last year, we had 100% placement rate, so all of our students got jobs in the field. Last year, I think it was about 84%, which is okay given the environment. Um, and yeah, I'm bullish long term. I've always found that companies feel like they're drowning in data but starving for insights. And I think there are a lot of things that AI can do, but synthesizing those insights, I think we've got a little bit of a lead on AI in that one. So that's definitely something that I encourage my students to do. Some want to go more the hardcore data science route, and I'm like, well, if that's your passion, go for it. But I think AI is coming for that first. And on the insight side, the thing that I think students struggle with sometimes is taking that creative leap, to be able to say, oh, our data said this, but that really what consumers want is that, or what this is telling us is, or I remember we had one project for it was part of our practicum program. It was a big CPG company, and they gave our students kind of this big ambitious project. Where's our industry going to be in 5 years? and the students, they had to go draft a survey, and they came back with a survey that was like, it was not going to address that. So I kind of had to give them a pep talk, and it's like your client's asking you to think big, think outside the box. Those You guys are thinking small. Those little questions aren't going to answer the big issues, and so it's kind of building up their confidence that they can take a leap. They're empowered to kind of think big. And so I think that yeah, like AI is obviously going to come for a lot of jobs. But I think with skills that we're giving the students and kind of teaching that creative leap and building up the confidence in the creative leap, I think hopefully is going to serve them well in the job market.
I agree. Creativities. I heard a great quote last week, and I'm scratching my head to remember who told it to me. I've heard it before, but it was, we're dot collectors, and we also need to be dot connectors. And I feel like that AI is helping us kind of collect and give us ideas, but we still need to connect those dots. And what are the impacts, for a Frito-Lay or for a bicycle company that,
Yeah.
who should they compare themselves to? I just think it's very, very interesting. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it. I feel like there might need to be a sequel to this on some of your other focuses over the past handful of years, but I really
I would
appreciate
love that. As
it.
we were talking about before the intro, I can't believe we have 695 shared LinkedIn connections, but we haven't crossed paths before. So it's
It's
great to meet
it's it's a very, very small world. And for our listeners out there, I strongly encourage you to go out and buy Steve's book. I'm, but for sure, check out his TEDx talk. It's fascinating, especially when you think of how long ago it was done and how relevant it is to like right now. The
you.
names of the people have been changed, but it's still very, very relevant. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take
Take
care.
care.
Cheers.